Hello Tenno, and welcome back to the Warframe Academy, a series where I explain to you the fundamental build requirements of each and every Warframe in alphabetical order. I wonder how fast I can actually say that if I try. And today, we will be covering the painfully peaceful pacifist, Baruuk. I've played a lot of different games in my time, and never before have I ever seen a more perfect representation of what it means to be a true pacifist. Each of Baruuk's first three abilities are near perfect representations of the three major ways to avoid an escalation in violence. That is, walking away from the situation, trying to de-escalate the situation, or, if necessary, physically disarming your opponent. However, as these three methods of avoiding violence are employed, Baruuk's restraint is slowly going to be eroded, until ultimately, the only way to avoid an escalation in violence is to physically incapacitate your opponent through the act of violence. When it comes to building Baruuk, it ultimately comes down to your personal preference for which of the first three abilities you want to primarily rely upon in order to erode his restraint, with each of Baruuk's first three abilities representing a different stat value that you're going to want to prioritize building into in order to get the maximum value of that corresponding ability. For Elude, you want to prioritize range, as that directly corresponds to the angle of attacks that Baruuk can dodge. However, Elude is only active, while Baruuk himself is not attacking. Lull directly corresponds to either positive or negative duration. Positive duration means enemies will stay asleep longer. However, negative duration means you can recast the ability more often. And finally, Desolate Hands directly corresponds to your strength. The higher your strength, the more enemies that you can physically disarm before needing to recast the ability. Now here's where things start to get a little complicated. Baruuk's first three abilities are going to erode his restraint meter. However, his fourth ability is going to restore it. Thus, you need to find your own personal balance point within his toolkit in order to be able to erode his restraint faster than you can restore it. In my opinion, the best way to achieve this is to only use two of Baruuk's first three abilities. If we only rely on one of these three abilities, then odds are you're not going to erode your restraint faster than you can restore it. And conversely, if you use all three abilities, then odds are you're going to restore it faster than you can erode it. When it comes to ranking our Warframe, we do that by a scale of Sprawdlings. One Sprawdling is equivalent to around 50 points. Scoring Baruuk, however, is ultimately going to come down to your personal preference for which of the first three abilities you're going to be prioritizing in order to erode Baruuk's restraint. For an Elude Baruuk, I would give 2 to 3 Sprawdlings for duration, 1 to 2 Sprawdlings for efficiency, 4 Sprawdlings for range, and 3 to 4 Sprawdlings for strength. For a Lull Baruuk, depending on whether or not you want to put enemies to sleep more often or have enemies stay asleep longer, I would give 1 to 4 Sprawdlings for duration, 1 to 2 Sprawdlings for efficiency, 3 to 4 Sprawdlings for range, and 3 to 4 Sprawdlings for strength. And finally, for a Desolate Hands Baruuk, I would give 2 to 3 Sprawdlings for duration, 1 to 2 Sprawdlings for efficiency, 3 to 4 Sprawdlings for range, and 4 to 5 Sprawdlings for strength. If you've enjoyed my content and want to continue seeing more of it, a like, share, or comment would be much appreciated, as that helps the algorithm. And if you are so inclined, you can support me further on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. However, never do so unless you are financially stable. And with all that out of the way, I hope you have an amazing day, Tenno, and I'll see you next time.